Oh, hey guys, so we are continuing on with the little series I've got for the Darren Henson lawsuit, the Bye 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 dance. Um, so we have looked at all the other defendants, and I have deliberately kind of left Nick Pauley until last. Um, I yeah, so I wanted to kind of leave him last because I think I've said this in other videos, but it's a bit of a segue into me then doing a video on why I think Ryan Reynolds should be added as a future defendant. I will slightly, when I do my video on Ryan Reynolds, I will slightly touch upon Sean Levy as well, but it is going to be predominantly about Ryan Reynolds. So like the other defendants, I'm going to go look at Nick Pauley, the strength and weaknesses of his the claims against him, and any potential defenses. Um, I kind of placed him below Sony, Epic Games, and Richmond Street Productions, but above Lance Bass. So I just wanted to, because I've already put my video out on Lance Bass, and if you watched it, I talked about, well, the defense is that this was just a one-off event. And, by the way, Joey Fatone also turned up to that event. So, could he be added to the complaint? Potentially. Now, I have actually done a little bit more research on that situation. A few details kind of cropped up that I didn't originally know. One was that I suppose technically it was like an event, but like a tour. When a band goes on tour, they have like a handful of dates in various places. It sounds like this was actually there may have been more than one date. Um, Now I'm not 100% sure. Um, it may have been just one day. But it could have. I'm not. I am open to the idea that there may have been like more than one session in this kind of event. And if that's the case, then Joey Fatone just happened to turn up to one by the looks of it, because I'll take you to it actually just to kind of show you. I found the advertisement for the event, and it is actually advertised as want to dance with Lance Bass. There is no mention of Joey Fatone. Um, so yeah, it's not specific on the day. It just says he's kicking off the month of May with special collaboration. Um, so yeah, but it is definitely billed as something that is specific to him. So did Joey just turn up and kind of get in? Was he paid? Was he not paid? I think there's a discovery to be done, and this may be what Darren Henson saw and didn't realize that there was actually another member of NSYNC who was there. So yeah, I want to keep an open mind and just kind of update with other information. But if it was a one day event, then Joey Fatone turned up to that. Whether or not he was paid is something that Darren Henson's going to have to look into. If he wasn't, then there's no claim against him. You see, the problem here with infringement is when it's commercialized and exploited for commercial gain. This very much suggests that Lance Bass, made some money from, learning to dance, and one of the dances was the Bye 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 dance. So, yeah. So if I go back now, I just want to update on the Lance Bass situation, but this video is about Nick Pauley, and that's where I want to go. Okay, so, right, yes. So, I kind of so I did put Nick Pauley above Lance Bass in terms of strength for claim against him, but below Sony, Epic, and Richmond Street Productions. Why? Because Nick Pauley's Instagram account is actually littered with videos and posts about the various roles he's done, not just beyond the film, like what he's done. Similar thing to Lance Bass, he's given dance lessons in Brazil, teaching the Deadpool dance as he was calling it. So, and he's been to various events as well, quite famously the Oscars. So that's why there's a lot more projects than what Lance Bass did. So I think there's more liability potentially, and potentially then that would equate to more damages. So I'm going to do the same thing as I've done for the previous defendants, where, look at the strengths, the weaknesses, and any possible defenses. And as I said, this has been left till last deliberately, so then I can do the next video on the whole Ryan Reynolds of it. So, an assessment of two distinct infringement theories arising from Pauley's alleged performance of choreography in Deadpool and Wolverine, and at subsequent paid workshops and public appearances. So we've got the first theory, which is the film performance itself. He performed the dance as an employee / contractor of Richmond Street Productions. So Pauley was not a licensor. He did not, he was not given any licenses. He didn't distribute anything, and he did not make any big major decisions. If any decisions, actually. Courts rarely impose liability on performers acting under production company direction. Okay, so he was hired for a role, he performed that role, and he was paid for that role. The court is not going to be inclined to hold him liable for doing a job he was hired for. They're more likely to go to the production company and say, hey, you hired the guy, you're responsible for the guy, and that's called vicarious liability. And Darren Henson does have that in his amended complaint. He is bringing an action for vicarious liability for Nick Pauley's role in the film. But then there's the other side of it, right? So the theory B, there were workshops and paid appearances, okay? And it's not quite clear whether it's just part of his promotional obligations as part of his role, or whether, he was kind of doing it off his own volition. Or, some of the things weren't connected to the film. Like there were some events that he was not wearing the suit. He performed at weddings. He taught the dance in workshops like Lance Bass did, where he wasn't wearing the suit, and it was not kind of advertised as something that was affiliated with Marvel, Disney, or Deadpool and Wolverine. Okay, so post-film performances at paid workshops constitute public performance under US Code 17, Section 106, subsection 4. Commercial exploitation, potential unauthorized derivative works, and ongoing infringement. For me, this is where Pauley's real exposure could be problematic. So I rated the overall strength, as moderate to strong, but materially weaker than the claims against Sony, Epic, or Marvel. Nick Pauley is a downstream performer, not a licensor or a corporate decision maker. So his strongest defense is going to be innocent infringement. Now, he can credibly assert that he was hired by Marvel / Richmond Street Productions to perform choreography that they represented as properly licensed. He had no independent reason to know that Henson claimed exclusive ownership, except I will challenge that a bit. I am going to slightly challenge that in a minute. An industry custom dictates that performers routinely rely on production companies to clear rights prior to engaging talent. So, reasonable belief, Pauley reasonably believed the choreography was owned or licensed by NSYNC or Sony or Marvel at the time of performance. Now, why do I say NSYNC? Well, obviously they performed as part of the dance. Now, on that assumption alone, he may not have assumed, he's a choreographer, so he knows how all this works. He may not have assumed, well, you know, it's NSYNC's dance. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that he didn't. But he may have, he reasonably would have assumed that Sony, would have licensed Marvel. Marvel probably represented to him that, yes, we've got licenses and everything all in place, all good. NSYNC were at the premiere for the film. So they were invited to the premiere. Darren Henson wasn't, by the way, but NSYNC were invited to the premiere. Now, I'm not concerned by that because, yes, the large part of that opening sequence was the dance. The focus was on the dance, but they did obviously need to use the music as well. So, it is perfectly reasonable that NSYNC were invited to the premiere as, the performers of the song. Industry custom. Dancers and choreographers operating under production contracts routinely assume that rights clearance has been handled upstream. Now, this may turn that on its head and, may require more scrutiny going forward and maybe, lose some of that assumption. In which case, not a bad thing. And then the effect on damages. So innocent infringement, as I've said before, does not eliminate liability, but can reduce statutory damages from, at the top end, if you can prove willfulness, $150,000 per infringement. It can reduce them down to as little as $200 per infringement. Again, under US Code 17, Section 504, subsection C2. Now, I said I would challenge the belief that Nick Pauley, hold on, I'm just getting it, sorry, that Nick Pauley, had no independent reason to know that Henson claimed exclusive ownership. As a dancer, I knew, certain big names. And Darren Henson and Wade Robson, if you don't know their names, then what are you even doing in choreography? But also, it has been very clear throughout time that this dance was Darren Henson's. And if I just share this screen. No, not that one. That one. There we go. Now, the video is out because I don't want to get copy stricken again because it does play the song. So I've stopped the song. It is basically just a video of Nick Pauley doing his audition dance. No, it's on a rooftop. It is where he's wearing a crop top. And I've actually shown this video in another one of these videos in this series. But if I just, because obviously I can't use a highlighter here. So if I highlight that little bit, it says music video choreography, and then he has credited Darren Henson. He has tagged Darren Henson. Okay, what I will say, now this was at the time, this was on the, 27th of July, 2024, right? This post was put up. So, when was the movie released? It was around that time, wasn't it? It was like a few weeks before. Right, release date of Deadpool 3. 25th of July. Is it really? I'm going to make sure that's the US release date, not the UK. Oh, 26th of July. Wow, really? It premiered though. Hold on. Right. Yeah. So it was released, on the 25th, 26th. But the premiere was the 22nd of July. So this is right after the premiere. I will say he has edited it at the time, around the time. I'm not being cynical. He may well have edited every other part and always have credited Darren Henson. However, I'm just going to go to another post where this was put up on the 26th of July. Okay, so this was the date of the release. And he says, "It's true, I am Dancepool in the new Deadpool and Wolverine. It's been hard to keep the secret. Blah, 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 blah. Lots of Ryan Reynolds. And then we have it at the end. Again, I'm just trying to... Oh, God. I hate my mouse. Can I just put that out there? Choreography by Darren Henson. Now, I think this has been added subsequently, right? Again, he could have shouted out... he could have edited this to change any part of this. I don't 100% know. But this was edited 7 weeks ago. It was posted on the 26th of July, as the date at the bottom here under the heart says, but edited just 7 weeks ago, which is roughly when he was added to the lawsuit. It is roughly when he was added. Well, it was during the mediation, actually. It would have been during the mediation that was attempted by Darren Henson. So, because he was added to the lawsuit on the 26th of June. So, no, it wasn't when he was added there, but it would have been during the mediation period that they were going through. So, that's my very small challenge. I didn't want to go too deep into it because I don't know. But the cynic in me is a bit questioning, shall we say. Okay. So then we have a second defense, implied license. So Pauley could make the argument that NSYNC's decades of public performance of this choreography, combined with its integration into the group's brand identity, gave rise to an implied license permitting promotional use. That would not be an unreasonable argument to make. I don't think it would be successful, but it's not a bad argument to make. Now, Marvel's act of hiring him to perform the dance would reasonably signal to any professional in the industry that rights had been cleared. Industry custom further supports the proposition that choreography taught to or performed by contracted talent is implicitly licensed for associated promotional activities, right? And that's where Lance Bass may actually benefit, because it was licensed. An associated promotional activity is NSYNC performing, on stage in an arena somewhere to thousands of fans who are paid to come and see them. When they're performing the song, there is an implied license that they are going to do the routine to go with the song, right? Because that's the whole purpose of the choreography. That implied license would not extend to Lance Bass doing a separate, promotional event where he profited to teach people the dance. That's not part of NSYNC. That's Lance Bass. But likewise, Deadpool and Wolverine had nothing to do with NSYNC either. So, their song was used, ergo the dance was used, but the two were not connected, and it is not... it's not what I would call an associated promotional activity, if that makes some sense. So strength by context. The film performance is stronger. Marvel's explicit engagement supports the implied license narrative. Okay, because if you can't trust big guns like Sony and Marvel, then who can you trust? And then post-film workshops, there's a weaker argument there. Independent commercial use is harder to shelter under an implied license theory. Work for hire shield. So like every other defendant, if Sony can pull a work for hire contract that Darren Henson signed back in, 1999 out of their ass anytime soon, which they have not been able to do for the last 2 years. Everyone is protected. Everyone is shielded, right? And the claim would collapse. I don't think that's going to happen because it would have happened already. So where a performer executes direction under an employment or contractor agreement, liability typically attaches to the engaging entity rather than the individual. So Pauley did not select or choreograph the work. He performed it at the direction of Richmond Street Productions, right? And when I say he did not choreograph the work, just so there's no confusion, the choreograph is the, that's what Darren Henson did. He basically wrote the dance. He created the dance. Nick Pauley did not create the dance. He just simply performed it. But he also did not choose the dance either. And again, more on that bit in my next video. So, in terms of work for hire shield, as a defense, film performance, moderate. Pauley acted as an employee or contractor of Richmond Street Productions. He exercised no independent creative or licensing authority. The work for hire doctrine strongly supports shifting liability to the employer in this context. And then post-film workshops. It is weak. The reason it's so weak is because there's no license for him to have done that, right? Whereas, there's an assertion that Marvel obtained a license to use the dance in the film. No license was requested, obtained, or granted for Nick Pauley or Lance Bass to do anything else with it. So any post-film workshops that are not part of the promotional obligations for the film are not covered. So when Pauley independently organized and delivered paid workshops, he acted outside of any employment relationship, so there's no vicarious liability protection. No employer shield applies. He bears direct personal liability for those performances. Now, this defense is most effective when used in tandem with the innocent infringement argument. Together, they may construct a coherent narrative of good faith reliance on employer direction. De minimis use. So Pauley could argue that the portion of choreography used was too insubstantial to constitute actionable infringement. However, this defense is weak on the facts alleged, because if you look on Pauley's own Instagram, he actually shows like a behind the scenes where you can see Sean Levy in the director's chair laughing and going, yeah, right? He actually shows that video of him doing the performance in front of the blue screen, and he is basically doing the whole dance. The fact that a director and producers decided which bits to put in and which bits to not put in is not down to Nick Pauley. So this is why I think, well, yeah, okay, the whole routine wasn't in the film because it kept cutting to fight scenes. However, what was used was so recognizable. And as I've said several times, if they'd switched the music off, we still would have known what song that dance came from. That's how recognizable it was. It was the key pertinent points, which was the chorus. So a lot of the fight scene happened around the bits that were not the main part of the chorus. Okay. And I do say, the defense is weak on the facts alleged. So the core choreography performed. Pauley allegedly performed the central recognizable elements of the work, not a peripheral or incidental excerpt, which is the argument I just kind of made. Commercial context. Workshops were paid engagements. Courts applied de minimis doctrine far less generously in commercial settings. And then finally, brevity is not a shield. So courts consistently hold that choreographic works are protectable even when brief, provided they meet the originality threshold, which it does. Fair use. This is going to be Very weak. Okay, so fair use is almost certainly unavailable to Pauley. Each of the 4 statutory factors under US Code 17, Section 107, weighs against him in the workshop context. So those 4 statutory factors have got commercial purpose. And a lot of this is about the workshops because the film is quite self-explanatory. Workshops were conducted for profit. The first factor, purpose, and character abuse weighs heavily against Pauley. Then we got heart of the work. Pauley performed the most recognisable central elements of the choreography. That's not the second one, that's the third factor. It disfavours fair use. Non-transformative is the second one. There was no creative transformation. The choreography was reproduced substantially as originally expressed. And then market substitution. Pauley's workshops directly substitute for Henson's own potential paid workshops, harming the market for the original work. And again, there's obviously precedent there with the Hanagami case against Epic Games. When we say the non-transformative part, like when we say the choreography was reproduced substantially as originally expressed, Nick Pauley did not, adapt it and change it in any way to make it different and to make it his own, right? He literally performed the original dance. Defendants. So placing Pauley's exposure in the context of the broader defendant landscape is essential for assessing settlement strategy and relative litigation priority. So I've kind of done some ratings there. It's just a bit of fun. It's obviously not an exact science, but it's just as a visual then to show how much liability weighs on certain defendants versus others. For some reason I put low to medium on Nick Pauley. I think it's a bit higher than that. I think it's moderate to kind of strong. For the film, I think he's fairly shielded. For the workshops though that are nothing to do with the film, I think he is exposed. It's a problem. Obviously Sony, Epic Games and Richmond Street Productions have the highest exposure, and Lance Bass is low exposure, and I do think that he could come to an arrangement with Darren Henson, and get out of this lawsuit quite quickly. I wouldn't be surprised to see him doing that, and I think that's fair. But I do understand. I understand why Darren Henson has brought the case anyway, because he's like, basically clipping the wings even of the NSYNC group performers, to say, yes, you're allowed to use my dance for this purpose, but you don't get to use it however you want, and you don't get to monetize it, at will kind of thing. There are, I think it's a request for some respect and recognition, and I absolutely think that is the least that anyone can do. What else have we got? Okay, so yeah, my kind of conclusion is that Pauley is a peripheral defendant. So film performance, I think he's substantially shielded by employer direction and the work for hire doctrine, so vicarious liability is going to kick in, which will add to Richmond Street Productions problems, but there we go. Direct liability is unlikely to attach to Pauley personally for the performance in the film. However, workshop performances, they create real but quantifiably limited direct infringement exposure. So damages will be modest relative to corporate defendants. I don't think that Darren Henson's and I don't think he's overly seeking to either, but I don't think Darren Henson's going to be able to show willfulness, in quite the same way that he could with the corporate defendants who, clearly think the law didn't apply to them. Strongest defences: innocent infringement, implied license, and work for hire shield. used in combination, materially reduce both liability risk and any damages award. Pauley is not a major infringer. He is a downstream performer whose liability is contingent on proof that he knew or ought to have known that a separate license was required for his independent commercial use of the choreography. So that's kind of my kind of thoughts on Nick Pauley as a defendant. You're going to want to be here for the next one, though.